how do we entice the young folks into our industry? And I actually believe that the Internet of Things, ever what the heck that is a method that is likely to drag them in. It helps us be sexy as we're starting to move. Things like the Nest thermostat took us out of the weeds and kind of put us in the highlight. It's a different world, and I think it's going to help us bridge the gap. Okay, our next speaker is from Enocean, and I've been extremely impressed with Enocean because they're a connection community, a strong connection community that came into our industry, I would say, quite late, and their entrance impressed me in the fact that they were able to blend into the community and become part of almost all of these connection communities, and they caused very little ripple, which is totally amazing. And they did it all, batteries not included. In fact, batteries not required. So, Jim, would you like to speak to that?
Well, sure. Thanks, Kevin. So I'm Jim O'Callahan, and I'm actually heading up Enocean Corporation, which makes the base technology. Their North American operations, our headquarters are in Germany. But I'm also representing the Enocean Alliance, which is a consortium of around 350 companies, of which approximately half are manufacturers that integrate the Enocean technology and then resell that. And from day one, things like interoperability, ability to communicate, and ability to install and have devices from different manufacturers work without some special hand-holding has been essential. Our company primarily focuses in the area of sensors, switches, devices that are oftentimes used in this IoT. So what I wanted to do is just share a little bit about the scale and the perspective of what we see and what a lot of people are predicting. So if you think of a typical human being, as an example, we can sense about 10 different parameters, which translates to about 70 billion sensors being used by human beings. Buildings, homes, cars, communities are very similar to that, and that these buildings and homes and cars need sensors, switches, and information in order for their brains, the controllers, to control their environment. As we look at the Internet of Things evolving, some of the numbers are fairly staggering. We looked at some research from Intel, HP, Bosch, Yole, and a few others, and taking some of the low end of those predictions, by 2020, the range of devices connected to this IoT is expected to be between 10 and 100 billion. And to give you a rough idea, there's about 100 million sensors kind of connected to the internet today. So we're talking about 1,000, 10,000-fold growth. What will these devices be? Well, we think that they're going to be in layers. One, you're going to see personal sensors like the Fitbits and those devices that you wear. We think over time, those things, instead of being fitness gadgets, will turn into medical type of things where big data will be very valuable in taking a large population and turning that information into insight. Those local personal area networks are evidenced if any of you were at CES, where you see a bit more of it than in a more traditional show like this. You'll see Fitbits for people, you'll see Fitbits for dogs, if your dog didn't get enough exercise. And believe it or not, there were sensors attached to just about every type of sports equipment you can think of: snowboards, skis, shoes, etc. So there's a ton of interest in where that'll all go is yet to be determined. Also see the local area. So by local area, we would mean things like your home, your work, your office, your car. So your individual devices, we see linking up with your other device that says things like, I'm entering my house, turn on the lights the way I want, turn on the air conditioning, etc. But we see that linking up to the global. So as you go to leave for work, you're leaving, you'll be able to connect to things that will help you identify which route to take to work, what's the weather going to be, and to predict it. And as we layer these three levels together, that's where a lot of the benefit from the Internet of Things comes from. The interoperability between systems that you use, that your local environment uses, and your global. If there's going to be 10 to 100 billion devices, we believe there's a high probability a good number of those will be wireless. If you look at how phones have been deployed in places like China, where you had to go from basically very few landlines to maybe 1 billion phones. Obviously, wireless was significantly easier than deploying all that infrastructure. If you talk about 10 billion devices, a good portion of those wireless devices are going to be remotely managed. If you look about things, sensors that are up in the ceiling, sensors on pipelines, etc. So many of those sensors are going to ask the question, where do I get the energy from? And if you start to do some math there, you start to say, if a thing has an average battery life of 10 years, you're talking about either replacing 1 billion devices a year or 1 billion batteries a year. And so the issue of powering this Internet of Things, of deploying it, connecting it, is pretty significant. One other element that I do agree with, I think a couple of the comments here, and that is that most people contend that IP will be the communication standard at the top level, of course. But if you look at these millions of devices and you say a lot of them are wireless, it's about 7 times more energy to transmit an IP packet than it is to transmit a simple packet like an Ocean or a Zigbee or a Z-Wave, those types of communications. So clearly, I think the community is saying that there's going to be a development of 2 layers. One will be the higher data rate, data intense, high speed, things like IP, Wi-Fi, etc. Then there will be more standards for the low power. And again, not so much evident in this audience here, but if you look at who are the 2 drivers of the mobile phone industry, you'll see that it's Google and Apple. Well, both of those conveniently happen to be promoting low data rate wireless standards, Thread through the Nest acquisition, and Bluetooth Low Energy. And so I think what you're going to see is a lot of push behind and drive in a number of areas to establish these wireless standards, and they're primarily driven to connect things to the Internet. One other point I wanted to follow up on what Andy said in lighting, and there is a pretty big opportunity, and if anyone hasn't been seeing it, it's going to be, I think, highly impactful. Historically, if you take the traditional fluorescent light, less than 1% of those were controlled or connected to anything. And the control for the fluorescent light was a light switch or a circuit breaker. We're seeing somewhere between 15 and 20% of the LED retrofits and installations are seeking controls. And the top LED driver manufacturers are all being requested by the fixture manufacturers, who are being driven by the system integrators, the ESCOs, and the end users to say, I need control systems. And what do you have for me? And so unlike some of the things that have developed in the HVAC and the automation side, there really have not been standards. There's DALI in Europe. What people are going to in North America is 0 to 10, which isn't a standard. It's a way to control light, but there's no communication or other standard there. And so there's quite a feeding frenzy here over how will this be tamed and how will this be controlled. And the one other point I wanted to follow up on what Paul mentioned with respect to the technical skill levels. One of the challenges California is traditionally a leader. They have their Title 24. One of the problems they had is that there's this dearth of skilled people that know how to install systems. And people like CLTC, California Lighting Technology Council, have done training programs through unions and through junior colleges and those. But the biggest barrier in many of the cases that is that there's a lack of skilled individuals. The electricians are up there wiring things in, but they don't oftentimes have the skills for how to commission them. So that means you have to bring another fairly expensive person in to hook it all up after they get it installed.